Mainly because it also gives me a chance to talk about some of the issues that I have been thinking about. And not just academically, because I also have to teach some of these things. So that sort of makes you focus a little more closely. One of the things that I began about 7 years ago was to take a group of, to create a course called Managing Globally. The idea was that we needed to really expose students to what it meant to be a manager in a global corporation, where it's one of the fundamental aspects you confront is that the corporation operates globally, and so the nature of decisions that you make need to be different, and how to be sensitive to the complexities of that. That's been going quite well. So as part of setting up that course, rather than just have it be academic content delivered in class, I decided to have a field trip component where we actually have field visits for 2 weeks during the winter break. So we have classes in the fall, and then we go for 2 weeks. And I've been sort of going back and forth each year with 25 students, and we visit companies in India. And over the last 7 years, which is not a long time if you think about it, in the life of a university, 7 years. Just people are getting started, right? I have myself witnessed some significant changes in even the way Indian companies sort of position themselves and see themselves as serving their clients. And of course, it's a misnomer to often say Indian companies, just like it's very hard to know what's a Japanese car. Right? It's not very clear that Toyota, just because it has its headquarters in Japan, is a Japanese car. It's sort of built down here in Louisville, Kentucky, and over here, and so on and so forth. So you find that many of the companies operating globally have sort of also changed their pitch. And this sort of is the topic of my talk here, is that we have increasingly, I think we are witnessing the change in the logic for sourcing, which initially began as labor arbitrage. And we currently see it more focused on something that delivers more value, more than just labor arbitrage, but innovation. And so that's what I want to be talking about. I thought one thing I wanted to do, I hope everybody's okay, I just wanted to record my own presentation just in case there's some ideas that I could come back to later. So this is the title of my talk. It's a small audience, so feel free to sort of jump in at any time. I have a couple of videos to sort of set the context and things like that. But really, I want this to be a talk that's useful to you, and as we talk about these, what I think are very important issues. So if you think about what one would say about global sourcing, this is something that we have come to really take for granted almost. There was a time when doctors, when they dictated their records, their medical records, they would dictate it on a tape, that they would go to a transcription pool, a bunch of people would be typing in, and a couple of days later they would give you the text. It turns out that a lot of such labor-intensive activity actually happens offshore. That's data entry, customer service, a whole bunch of, a whole set of activities that are fairly routine in nature. We're also starting to see a lot of non-routine activities, things like R&D and things like development, also being carried out overseas. Now, in my mind, that's not really alarming, because change in location of a task has some consequences, but not enormously so. And I just wanted to show you something in a context where you may recognize the same thing happening, but it's sort of a different nature. For instance, this is from the New York Times. It says, talks of the Broadway pit shrinks, drummer is sent to room. So I don't know if you can read it. The text is pretty small, but what it tells you is that the St. James Theatre in Broadway decided that they wanted to shrink the pit where musicians sit so that they could have more seats for patrons. And that adds up to $40,000 a week, right? So to shrink the pit, so you had to move the musicians out, and Broadway is about live musicians. What they have done is they have moved the percussionist and the harpist to a building that's a few floors above the theater. So it just talks of how the two of them, they cram themselves into a 10 by 20 foot room draped in crimson velvet curtains with water pipes running above. And what they're doing is they watch a little man, the conductor, on a television monitor. So the rest of the audience is, the rest of the musicians are down there. So it says this Miss Reinersman is the harpist and Herman is the percussionist, and so they play their stuff, which is piped in, and the audience, the interesting thing is, it finally gets piped to the audience, who cannot tell the difference, which is wonderful, right? So, well, if you think about it, this is just a relocation of where work is being done. And it creates some value for the company, and this is just merely moving where people sit. This is not necessarily alarming, is it?
Let's imagine that the harpist was in Bombay.
That's the next question. So that's a very logical progression, actually, though they haven't talked about it. Maybe the harpist needs to be in Shanghai because that's where the world's best harpist is, and so on and so forth. The interesting thing is, you would then transform the quality of music that the orchestra would create, right? So essentially, often the point is that once you go down this path, several other avenues to move forward become available, right? You could have increasingly, I've heard that a lot of the musical talent is overseas, so some of what you're saying may well come true, just because the kids are there playing the violin or whatever else, many, many more hours a day than our kids do, who are sort of captivated by other things. So, but that's a good point. But I wanted to say that to some extent, a lot of what you hear is about this kind of pure moving of where work is done, without fundamentally changing anything else. In my mind, that's not necessarily very alarming. So let me give you what I think is, so the way I see it, what matters is not where work is done, because we can always find people to do the work, and we should sort of organize things in a way that are efficient and effective. I think the bottom line really is the ability to capitalize on innovation and the ability to commercialize innovation, and that is a key ability, as long as US corporations have it. I think we are going to be all right. For instance, if you think about the iPad or the iPhone, all of these things that have truly revolutionized what we see as the humble phone. People don't buy it. Apparently the iPhone, I don't have one, it's not a very good phone, but who cares? Apparently it drops calls more than other phones, but people buy it for all kinds of reasons. It's actually designed here. Apple has commercialized it. A lot of components come from elsewhere. So the bottom line, I feel, is we really should focus more on the commercialization of innovation and not be very concerned about where innovation happens. And one of the points that I have is increasingly globalization and the broader diffusion of knowledge is moving knowledge to places where they're actually more fertile ground for innovation than our own home countries, for all kinds of reasons. And the point is to leverage these developments rather than see them as a threat. So that's what I'm going to say and demonstrate. But to come back to it, this is often just a change in location of where the task is what a lot of the innovation is, a lot of the buzz about sourcing is about. And let me play you a small video. I have a video that talks about, it's an ABC video, and it's quite interesting because it tells an interesting story. You'll have to listen to the sound through the speakers of this PC. I'll try to turn it up, but let's see. Sound This is an old video, I must say. But
freedom-loving mix of almost every known religion, home to 150 million peaceful Muslims. Imagine if that 1/5 of humanity in India were living like the people of Iraq today, blowing each other up in their houses of worship every other day and on the street. How different our world would be. So to me, India is a miracle. But there is nothing tidy about this country, and that includes Indian democracy. It is a big, sloppy thicket of red tape, party politics, and corruption. Very little gets built or fixed. Mass transit is miserable. Water and power are a horror. In the capital of Delhi, a third of the electricity is stolen. People just splice in and help themselves. And the traffic? Oh, the traffic. But if you sit here long enough and just watch, there's a method that emerges from the madness. Transactions, rituals, patterns. It's the same sort of self-organizing system scientists observe in anthills and beehives. Somehow, against all odds, things get done. And this might just be the secret to future success. C.K. Pahalat is an Indian-born American and a renowned business consultant. He says we should look at this grit and chaos not with pity, but with respect and fear, because this is the training ground for the next wave of global titans. Every kid here who is walking around is getting trained to be entrepreneur, to hustle, and to get a little bit more than what he or she has. If you look at this, you're unlikely to see that this is a place where people are going to get educated on how to use computers. Right. It doesn't look like much. In other words, I think this is a metaphor for India. What you see outside is not what is inside. Outside, this could be a shanty, but inside is a Pentium PC. I met Fareed while stepping over rats in a Bombay neighborhood. He was sending text messages on his cell phone. What's your ID? Email ID? My email address? There are 700 million Indians under the age of 35, 2.5 times the U.S. population. And there was a day when the best and brightest were eager to bring their brain power to America. But post 9/11, visas are tougher to get. And with a mall and McDonald's right down the street, why leave home? 301 on the clock, Priyanka is a popular DJ in Delhi.
Hi, welcome to Radio City.
And she conducted an on-air poll at our request. If you had a choice between taking your skills to America or staying in India, what would you do? The text message responses were almost unanimous. Look at that. We will challenge Western working for our country because India is best. That level of fierce pride and determination is evident everywhere. Is India catching up?
We are not behind you. It did you.
Not behind us, with us. You're seeing an explosion of 50 years of pent-up aspirations. If you want to know what India feels like today, it's very simple. Pull out a champagne bottle, shake it for an hour, then take the cork off. You don't want to get in the way of that cork. We did a similar look at China a few months back, and comparing the two, it's interesting. In China, a few Communist Party leaders snap their fingers and a highway gets built. In India, all this growth is coming from the street up. In fact, one author told me our economy grows while our government sleeps. They think that'll make it much more stable in the long haul. And China's going to get old before they get rich. This is a young country, so their labor force is going to challenge us in the next half century.
Right, so many millions more than we have here in terms of young people. But this prowess in technology, we all know about it, and science, where do they come from? Their secrets?
It's a 3,000-year-old reverence for knowledge. In fact, every college we went into had the goddess of knowledge. They consider study a form of worship, and parents see education as the only way out of those slums, so they will skip meals to send their kids to private schools.
And tomorrow you'll take us to daily life.
See how people are outsourcing more and more of their lives. Their kids' education, outsourced. Their surgeries, outsourced. It'll blow your mind.
I know you've been good at it.
okay. So you get the picture, but if you think about it, it's not really a problem. It's actually a huge advantage to have smart people elsewhere doing the kind of work that we need to have done. So it's sort of like, in my mind, it's just that you have the drummer sort of sitting somewhere else. What I want to now talk about is, let me just move forward. I want to talk a little bit about India because that's the country I know, but this is true of any kind of globalization. industrialization, and I'm sure it's true of any other country that we choose to address. I want to show you some of the slides from companies who talked to us in the early part of, I first went in 2004. So around 2004, people would say things like, well, India is the #1 destination, and point to, the cost is so low, and overall, India is such a great destination. And this is again from Dell in 2004, where they sort of had moved 6,000 people, 65 business processes. By the way, it's sort of 24. The average age of an agent is 24 years old. So these were really basically young kids who are working at the call center for Dell, solving technical problems. And by the way, this is the cost to the company. These are all annual costs. Okay, you can't argue with the kind of benefits you receive when you pay someone. The cost to the company is $4,000. It's sort of, I think in 7 years it's doubled. But $8,000 is what one would get paid. A manager would get paid $15,000. This hasn't really doubled, it's about $20,000. Yeah. These are managers, by the way. They would have MBAs, they would have maybe gone to University of Michigan or University of Minnesota. But these were the kinds of pitches we were getting, which focused more on cost and what the company was getting. Again, out of 2004, people were comparing India, and basically, if you think about it, a lot of the dialogue was around cost, right? It says that the cost, the estimated annual savings for leading companies, and this is from a company called Transverse, who had done all of these things for large corporations in the US, and said, look, the projected scale over 2 years, we're doubling to 25,000 people, and so on and so forth. It turns out, and this is one more of the cost, it turns out that increasingly, we are now starting to see a different kind of positioning by companies in India of what they are offering. And this is from NASSCOM, which is in India you have a body that's like a lobbying body for all of the software services. So it's the National Association of Software Services Companies, something like that. They're talking about strong growth in industry revenues, but one of the pieces that they're starting to talk about how these companies are transforming the way clients can create value. This is something about what they're talking about. Look, it's not just IT services, business process outsourcing, and increasingly a lot of engineering development. For instance, Sony has a fairly large number of software engineers in India. Guess what? They're making all they're designing all of the software that's sort of running video cameras. They're doing the software that's running games. So a lot of the design gets done in India. So the point I'm trying to tell you is that increasingly companies in India are also positioning themselves as being in specific domains, trying to help their clients improve their efficiencies. One other slide, I have a few slides from NASSCOM, and I wanted to sort of talk about it because essentially what NASSCOM is a mouthpiece for is the Indian computer software industry. A lot of what they're talking about is that it's becoming a global hub for R&D. 750 plus companies doing their R&D out of India. So while there's a lot of the lowering of costs, the pitch has actually changed. And here's what this is another of the slides from NASSCOM from this year. I think it says industry as a strategic partner for clients. For instance, if we have Seagate and Hutchinson Technologies, so there would be companies that would come and say, look, I'm sure you're struggling with your costs and all of that. We can do the next generation of products for you. So you're having people saying, look, we have these R&D engineers, we have these hardware design engineers. So increasingly they're saying, tell us what the 2015 new product design needs to look like, and we'll do it. So they'll come and give you a box. As they say, IP-led innovation. So they'll do whatever technology development, creation of intellectual property that is needed to finally try and create the product for you, hopefully better than or as good as what you could have done in-house.
Can you explain, so when you say pitch, are you mean playing field, or do you mean the
they say pitch.
come on.
No, this
Yeah,
is the
yeah,
thing that they're
okay.
coming and
Yeah,
offering
alright,
to
fine.
people, and
Yeah,
they have a
yeah.
track record, by the
But
way.
I'm sure, I am curious, what the range money is on this. I mean, what are the range of innovations that they will try to sell you?
There are two kinds of innovations, and that's what I wanted to say. The ones that they are selling are clearly those that are on the radar for companies here. And let me give you one. For instance, I know for sure that they're working with companies like Panasonic and all of the Japanese TV manufacturers to try and build all of the internet. They say, why should a TV just be a TV? Why should you have a screen to do your PC work, a screen? So they're talking of the merging of screens, and they're building all the electronics for this flat display to be a TV display when you want it.
Just another way to go at that, how about the patents? Are Dell's and Seagate's, are there recent patents? Are the inventors typically Indian, or is that stuff that's patented here and then basically produced?
See, there's not good data on it, but I believe that two kinds of R&D happens. Look, the piece that they come and sell to clients are really the commercialization of technologies. They say, hey, you have these great patents, right? We can build it into a product that works for you, which means a lot of the innovation happens at different levels. So there are all these physics and chemistry innovations on which you need to build products. So to build a large 60-inch screen which doubles up as a TV and a computer screen, and when you walk in with your cell phone, seamlessly, most of these cell phones have Skype in them. You can do video conferencing, sort of seamlessly transfers it over here. All of that is not really patentable. But it's the leveraging of technologies, putting them together into a product. So a lot of them are of that nature. However, I think I have a slide here. Increasingly, we are seeing companies realizing the value of it and going to countries like India to actually do the R&D over there. They say, okay, we are going to do the R&D ourselves. So GE has a very large R&D center. It's called the Jack Welch Technology Research Center in India. Honeywell has a very large R&D center where they are designing, the next generation avionics systems and things like that. GE is designing their turbofan blades. All of the stuff that involves patents, and it's patented out of India. And these are just two of the names. There's Motorola, there's Texas Instruments. In fact, Dell's R&D in India has come on the radar for the number of patents it generates. It's second only to the number generated out of Austin for Dell. So it's as people are building capability, which is a good thing, I would argue, that companies are able to leverage expertise available elsewhere.
You may want to talk about this later, but one of the things, and I think this was even apparent when you first talked to this group, Bhagwati and Srinivasan years and years ago said, don't worry about the problem of outsourcing because there'll be bottlenecks. Because India has this strange social structure and educational structure such that you get this strata of high flyers, and then there's these huge gaps in education, and that essentially the most capable people will essentially be put to work and they'll run. I mean, what do those data look like?
Actually, I wish there was better data on it but one thing is certain. When we went to Dell, they were telling us all of this. And one of the students in the audience was pretty upset. But, I'm not sure this is really true because I don't think Indian engineers, we know that we are much more innovative in the US and our training. And how does that, I'm not able to sort of reconcile that with what you're telling me. And so the country manager said, actually, Bob over there is from Austin, Texas, tall, 6'6". He's turned out to be an Englishman who had moved to Texas. So he came up and said, look, I am the engineering manager in Austin, Texas. I manage all of engineering. He says, it's my job, yeah, to take people who have the training to teach them how to be innovative and creative. So he says, this is something that can be taught. So companies are having to do a lot more. Rather than just hire the brightest, they are having to do some development, and then they are building talent in-house. But there is a very large now pool to draw from. I mean, Infosys talked about getting 1.4 million applications for, Infosys actually, the numbers are staggering. Let me give you, I don't have the numbers for Infosys, but I have the numbers for Wipro, the company I used to work for. A few years ago, almost 3 or 4 years ago, they used to be 75,000 people strong. They grew from 55 to 75, and the way it happened was when there were 55,000 people, they actually interviewed 1.2 million people, 1.2 million candidates. They interviewed first round interviews with 1.2 million, second round with 600,000, third round with about 300,000. Of course, if you're hiring a senior
And how
manager,
many people did they hire?
they issued 30,000 appointment letters. 25,000 people joined. Okay, 5,000 people left Wipro. In that, so from 55 they went up to 75.
That's amazing.
So if you think about, there are very huge pyramids out there. So the ability to have a pool to draw from. Let's a company like Wipro come here and say, you want 100 engineers. I'll give you 100 engineers in 3 weeks.
So basically, Bhagwati and Srinivasan were wrong. Or it
No,
sounds like-
Bhagwati and Srinivasan, I think, had viewed limitations that companies are finding ways to go around. This is certainly a limitation. I'm not going to say that an average engineer is going to be just like the average engineer here. He might need a little more training. He may sort of speak broken English, but the guy can do differential equations.
Right, speaking English is not.
Yeah, so some of that stuff is different, right? So the point is, I think, and this tells us that increasingly a lot of the R&D is also moving overseas. And as you can see, we have data here from, this is from the NSF, by the way. They do this business R&D and innovation survey. It shows that in motor, by the way, GM has a huge center they opened near Bangalore at a time when, it was very funny. They didn't want us to come, I couldn't actually, let me put it this way. I couldn't get into that for all kinds of reasons. But that was the time they were going down here and the government was acquiring GM. They had built up a massive strength of engineers who were building the car of the future. Because the rest of the world looks more like the developed world than the US. So cars designed in Bangalore for all the kind of cramped conditions are sort of much better suited for the world than if you design it sitting in Dearborn, Michigan. And that's part of the argument that I'm making, that we have to think of the leveraging of innovation that comes with it. So let me just move forward and but you had some questions, Bob.
No, I was just interested in this whole issue of the argument that was made about offshoring was that it would continue to get to be more and more of a serious problem. And in my understanding, when these guys argued with Samuelson, I won't go into the dispute about it, but Samuelson actually weighed in on the more skeptical side.
That's right.
And these guys said, well, it's only going to go on for so long because they're going to run out of really capable Indian talent. Well, what you're saying is that isn't happening.
Yeah.
When you start with that number of folks over a period of time, it's true you might not reach all the way down, but the level of education and aspiration and opportunity will bring folks up.
Right. And I think there are some, let me tell you, this Bhagwati's argument is the argument of the elite Indians. It used to be. Because
Bhagwati has
I'll tell you what.
a characteristic of having spent about 18 years of his life in India. No, that's not true, but I mean, he's spent a lot more of his life outside of India.
As Indians, I'll tell you, because many of us came from these elite educational institutions. So you have 100,000 people who apply, 2,000 get taken, that sort of, so you have these core elite, and many of these people who went to the Indian engineering colleges, the elite engineering schools, were the people who populated, GE and Motorola and Apple and all that in the 90s and 80s and the 90s. It turns out that, so when I used to go out and meet, when I was a grad student, I used to meet, hey, where are you from? You were most probably from one of the Indian Institutes of Management. But there are just 5 of them, which has now become some 10. It turns out that India actually opens 1 engineering college and 1 medical college school every day. So today I meet people from
Places you've never heard of.
places I didn't hear of, and we used to look down upon these places that we were the elite, and everybody said, oh, you're going to scrape the bottom of the barrel. And then, but Target continues to work, American Express continues to do well. It turns out that the elite kids don't want to go work for all these. They want to do PhD, they want to do other things. So it turns out that there's so many of them and very few of us. The Bhagavati argument is just the us saying that, hey, there's not so many of us around. So it has also been very eye-opening to me, I must confess. I felt, hey, if you're not from one of the kind of schools I went to, you must not be very smart.
It's very
turns out
interesting argument. I mean,
that-
I'm really glad I asked you.
So and let me tell you, the other thing that's happening is that the education on the internet is an enormous boon to India. Because if there are people, there are investors in India ready to invest in engineering schools. You know the scarcest resource in India today is faculty. Because if you are breathing and you're smart, you're already the vice president of R&D somewhere, right? Think about the average profile of the faculty member who went to a good school here. All the people who taught me were people who went to Yale, MIT, Minnesota, and places like that. It's turned out that there's not so many of them, or as many of them needed, to provide quality education in our schools. And so it's almost as if those who can't get a job sort of have to get into teaching. And this online education is, I would say, going to be a major issue. Places like MIT putting open courseware, things like that happening. There are lots and lots of engineering schools where people have invested in fancy facilities. It's easy to build a nice room. So they all get together and they watch videos from MIT, all of these videos. And then there is an instructor who comes on. He's most probably being shared across 10 other schools who explains, this is what you saw, now I'm going to show you something else. And so you see
You don't need chefs if the recipes and the cooks are good enough, right? I mean, it's almost like that.
But education is a little, you still need some, okay, now you're going to go to the lab and try out some of these, and that's when they need some people. But increasingly, education is becoming a huge growth area. I mean, of course, partly it's now, I'm talking about some of the policies of the Indian government. Right now, Harvard cannot come and open up a Harvard in India. It's just not allowed. India has always had this view of education being a not-for-profit enterprise, like it was in England. Oxford doesn't make money. Oxford has always been an institution, but it's a not-for-profit. So you have these large numbers of not-for-profit trusts and all that are going on. And people like Infosys run training colleges for 10,000 recruits. When they recruit 10,000 a year, so they're a massive university. So my point is, Bhagavati and Chandrasekhar had their finger on something that was really a problem, which has been a huge opportunity.
Well, that's fascinating.
For people in India. But here's the other issue is that I have some facts about India. I'm going to step through them just because to give you an idea that life in India is different from life in the US, which is a positive thing from an innovation point of view. Because the nature of the problems are very different. Okay? India is a very diverse kind of country. It turns out that in the 2001 census, cities with more than 1 million very large number. India's really a very crowded place. I mean, this guy, Tom Friedman, has this book, Hot, Flat, and Crowded. You can argue with whether it's flat or not,
Yeah.
but it's certainly hot and it's crowded for sure. Let me just move forward here.
Oh, that was a cunning picture of the map of India overlaid on the United States.
Let me show you this. It's very interesting. It says, what's India like? This is what one of my, many of my students come back and have their company say, hey, give us a talk. So this is, some of the best ideas come from my students
No,
to
this
do
is
these
pretty
things.
cool, actually.
They have, what's India like? There's no one India. Here's the other thing. People talk about, who's India anyway? When two Indians meet, they may not even be able to talk to each other. They may look different.
Yeah.
It's like a German meeting a Frenchman, right? So India is like a whole bunch of cultures. It's more like Europe than a country. So it's actually this. It's sort of it has a continental scale. So I remember when we were growing up, India used to be called the Indian subcontinent. That's how we used to refer to India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. But now it's sort of the more fashionable term is South Asia. It used to be called the Indian subcontinent. Here's the other thing. This is his slide. What does 1 billion people feel like? And this is a view from the car that he took out there. I mean, this is one side of the street. This is the other side of the street. It's not a very wide street, right? And there's traffic of all kinds. My point is that this kind of India is clearly resource constrained. Right? It has 1/6 of the world's population. It has something like 1/40th of the world's GDP.
And it needs energy and water.
Yes, it has energy and water. I mean, India has, if every Indian lived like we live over here, there's not enough place in the planet to send the trash, or the energy to consume and things like that. So we really have to think differently when you're in a country the size of India. And this, actually, goods delivery, I forgot an S over here. This is actually a licensed goods delivery vehicle. By the way, it's just, it has a number, it's registered, and this guy is doing the job. He's part of the supply chain in this narrow street. But if you think about, and by the way, this is the conventional goods carrier. It's a pickup truck with a flat bed and everything. It turns out that this created the need for an innovation, which is a $3,500 pickup truck, which can truly be at home in a place like this. Take it. So this is a $3,500 pickup truck. It's got a 5-inch cargo box, half a ton payload. By the way, it gives you 27 kilometers a liter, which is 100 miles, 100 kilometers a gallon. It's sort of kind of efficient. Interestingly, this is built. This uses an American-built engine. Mahindra is the Indian company that builds it on a Cummins engine. It's a Cummins engine actually. By the way, this has a.
That's a sort of, Cummins makes sort of general purpose industrial.
Yes, it's a general purpose engine which Cummins built for them, sort of worked with them to sort of make it a little lighter and fit their needs. Here's the main thing. It has a 12.5-foot turning radius. And I said, is that big or is it, how big? I went and checked. This is my Toyota Corolla's turning radius. It's the smallest car. It's kind of a subcompact kind of car.
So this thing turns on a dime, basically.
This thing really turns.
Yep.
So the question is, why would you need a vehicle like this? Because you have the kinds of problems that you have. The point is, now that Mahindra has this, Mahindra has been trying to export this to Nairobi and other places because the rest of the world is also crowded.
I'll bet Singapore probably can use these. Yeah.
Of course, Singapore is more of the Western model.
Yeah.
They have Western scale roads at least.
Yeah, but even so, there are parts that you.
Oh yeah, exactly.
And
Older parts.
Yeah,
The older
all of
parts.
South Asia would really be.
So my point is, This is
Are
from-
they manufacturing that whole thing in India, or are they outsourcing some of the manufacturing?
It's a very interesting question. They are started in India, but now they're manufacturing it in China.
Yeah.
So they decided that look, the Chinese can bend sheet metal better than anybody else. So, but it was designed in India, sort of made in India designed in India, and sort of runs on the streets and sort of sold. And by the way, this is in the light commercial vehicle category. So
I
Mahindra
appreciate this question is a bit off your expertise, but what I try to make clear to my students, but I can't do it very well because I don't know the facts very well, is that the whole tradition of import substitution industrialization in India has left the internal price level very high, which makes manufacturing exports very difficult in general. And how quickly is that turning around? Because the difference between India and China in this regard is night and day. I mean, here we have, soccer balls and cricket bats and a few other things, and, where everything's made in China. So is that being fixed?
It's a very good concern. I'll tell you why. Because increasingly, people are alarmed at the flooding of Chinese goods in India of,
And now,
cost lower than what you can make.
India files more anti-dumping complaints
Oh,
than
is that
any
it?
other country in the world. Nearly all of them are against China. So, in other words, we used to be number one. Now India's number one.
It's very interesting, the shoes on the other foot. But to some extent, you raised some very interesting questions. What has happened is that, again, this is not within my area of expertise, but to some extent, India has focused on higher education. So when India became independent, we built engineering colleges, we built medical colleges, and sort of said that everything is going to trickle down from there. As a result, our what are these, Dunwoody Institute kind of places are really pathetic.
Yeah.
We don't have these mid-level places. Actually, India's primary education suffered because there was so much so much emphasis from the top. It turns out, very interestingly, I don't know if it's true now or not, China has focused a lot on the bottom. Their primary education and their middle level, their skills and trades are all pretty strong. I don't know, again, I'm not the expert, but I can give you something that is consistent with this story for me. I've been here since 1997, and every year we receive PhD applications. We used to get about 100 applications. It's kind of remained steady.
This is in IT industry?
In the information systems group, and we used to hire for students, we used to get 100 applications. It used to be that 30 used to be from India, about 30 or so used to be from China, and 40 were from the rest of the world. So that was a proportion.
Yep.
It turns out that over time, our applications have remained sort of steady, or actually have fallen. We're now doing about 60 applicants for every 100 that we used to get before. It turns out 50 are from China, 10 are from the rest of the world, and nearly just 0 are from India. 0. In fact, many of us are worried, where's the next management talent going to come from, because it was always very hard to attract US local candidates. I mean, if there is one, we look very carefully and try very hard to admit that person. It turns out he or she is already admitted at a dozen other places as well, and so we have a fight over that. It turns out that the number from China has gone up. The number from India has become almost 0. It just seems that all of the higher education talent is just getting employed in India. That doesn't seem to be happening for all the higher education out of China. So I don't know, it might, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know how that translates into production structure exactly, but it's still pretty remarkable that when people compare India and China, their export profiles are completely different. I mean, and the size of the relative size of the export sector, the trade trade sector is very, very different. And that, of course, is what you associate with the protectionist economy, because you can't cut down imports without cutting down exports too, definitionally, without capital flows. So, in a sense, India still is floating in this autarkic commercial environment. Not as much as it was, but it hasn't changed as much as I would have anticipated either.
It's changing more slowly for all kinds of reasons. One of the, and maybe this is a good time, I don't know what's the answer to that and what would be right for that, because there never has been a democracy the size of India.
That's right.
There isn't any other place. You liberalize and you open up, people flood in, people get unemployed and get thrown out of work.
Right.
Guess what?
Right.
You're going to have someone who's going to be extremely right-wing,
That's exactly
who'll
right.
come and throw everybody else out.
It's a very good point.
So,
The theory of comparative advantage is not a well-known or well-accepted idea in political economy. And so the more, it's a great prediction. So the more democratic the country is, the harder it has to have a reasonable commercial policy from an economist's point of view. You know,
but there are smart people. The Indian government is smart. I mean, they want to be in power. How do you stay in power? By creating jobs, by doing good things. And they're doing it at the margins in many ways. For example, you can't today open a, Target can't go into India and open up a Target. That's because retail is completely local in India. Retail is completely decentralized in India. So you go to a little...
politically.
No, physically, I mean, structurally.
But there are no laws against Target going in?
There are laws
Yeah.
against Target.
Yeah.
That is because the origin of it comes from the fact that today it's a very large number of small shopkeepers who would all get thrown out of business if a Target came. But so the retail sector is closed, but we were actually, one of the people we meet is maybe you should come with me sometime. You saw these policy makers, you would have a fascinating time meeting them. We met the industry secretary, the guy who makes all the decisions. So he said, well, opening up the retail sector is very hard. I'm not even sure it's going to work well. Because people will bring US methods and they'll sort of graft it to India. And he told me a story that, look, Walmart went to Germany, opened up their Walmarts, spent a couple of years doing all kinds of things, didn't work, they pulled out. Right? Said if Walmart did the same thing in India, millions of people would go broke and shops would go, and then they pull out. Who's going to build this up again?
Right. Yeah.
Right? So he says that we have to be much more careful. So they have opened the retail sector to investment by branded goods companies. Nike can open a store in India.
Right.
Reebok can open their store in India.
Right.
So
That's the way some Latin American countries have handled it too. Yeah.
So-
No, it is a very interesting.
But the interesting point I have, so I don't really understand some of these things. I mean, India is so crowded that again, I mean, the automotive sector, I mean, everybody is upwardly mobile, they want cars, and so people like Ford and GM were doing very well. So there was an Indian company that said, well, hey, here's it says it's a 1 lakh car. By the way, a lakh is $2,000. So here is a fully functional, Euro-compliant car that you can buy for. It turns out that it wasn't fully $2,000. I mean, it's just like the starting price. You go there to buy, it ends up being $2,400. But
Yeah.
So this is the point I'm saying is that this is the other piece that they're starting to say that look, why do you need to manufacture it, and a lot of the cost of the car is sort of building it in one place and moving it all over. If you have it made simpler, you could just ship the kit and your local mechanic could sort of put it together for you to be a functioning car. And the point I'm saying is that an exposure to different kinds of complex situations creates opportunities for innovation, because I feel that the strength of the US economy is the commercialization of innovation, rather than necessarily so if we focus on I think we should be worried about commercialization. It's extremely important that we reap the benefits of innovation. I mean, we continue to have the capabilities to reap the benefits, but as they say, the orchestra sitting, as long as the outcomes are sort of controlled by you. So it's interesting. And let me give you another instance. You see, if you have 1 billion people, you need to do a very large number of heart operations. Right? Here's a question. This is about, I have a video, but I'll skip that for now. There's a person called Devi Shetty who has been termed by Wall Street Journal as the Henry Ford of heart surgery. And this is from one of these forums. How much does it cost to have a heart bypass surgery? And this is on these Yahoo answers, right? There's some kid whose father had a heart attack, small heart attack. He'll need bypass. How much does it cost? I live in Houston. My dad's 53. He's blah, blah, blah. Then there's his, actually he had, I should have got it. I mean, his handle was Houston area. Somebody says, Houston area, my bill was $169,000. But since I'm on Medicare, I received a $135,000 discount, leaving a balance of so much. So this is what it costs in the US. In India, there's this person who charges $2,000 on average. Now this is actually from the Wall Street Journal.
Biggest problem they have though is they have antibiotic resistant staph infection. The hospitals in India, it's rampant.
Yeah, I'm sure. This is the real thing. India is actually a very tough environment for all these reasons. It's hot, bugs thrive. As a result, you might have questions about outcomes, right?
But you can have you can imagine, and I'm sure they have this sort of commercial campuses where it's just completely isolated from
but,
the broader environment.
I think it's funny that you should say that because Devi Shetty was actually here a couple of weeks ago. He was honored by the University of Minnesota. They gave him an honorary doctorate, right? All of that.
Yeah.
So he said that, look, one of the classic strategies has been to create these antiseptic places that we seal them off.
Right.
And guess what? After 2 weeks, these people, we eject them back into the thing that we want them to avoid, right? So,
well, I was thinking of, I don't know whether it's done, I was thinking of sort of almost helicoptering people in and out without them ever going through the rest of India.
So the thing that he said was, look, we have found that having air conditioners and closed air circulation systems actually exacerbates the problem. So he says, India is a hot country, we just have them all fully ventilated. There's nothing like sunshine.
That's fascinating.
And then the other thing is, he's trying to do it at $2,000, remember? He says, look.
Actually, he could probably charge a little more and still undercut the competition.
But he has a hybrid model, I'll tell you about it. He says, look, we try to have huge staffing ratios, highly trained nurses and all that. He says that the person who can give care with the most diligence is your own family member. So he builds a room where you have a family member that goes through the experience with the person. That person is going to stay awake all night to make sure that when this person coughs, he gets water and sort of watches the monitor, right? So the cost business. So to your point, there's a Harvard business case on the Narayana Hridayalaya. And they did they compared it with Mount Sinai and all that. And it turns out that their outcomes are as good or better than the best in the world. So, and they speculate about all kinds of reasons. And interestingly, Dr. Devi Shetty, he is trying to replicate this in the Cayman Islands. He says that's as close to the US as it gets. The only thing he wanted in the Cayman Islands was that he said, I want a cap on damage awards.
Yeah,
Or
right.
on emotional suffering or
and
something.
That's always what people look at, because that's a huge part of the cost. But who are the physicians going to be in the Cayman Islands?
I don't know. So he says that, this is another interesting story. So when we sort of asked him this question, he said, look, you think heart surgery is very complicated? Actually, it's not. He said at the end, it's just cutting and sewing. All right? So, I mean, this is the way
you have to know what you're doing.
He is the one man, I think he has the largest number of surgeries ever performed. He's way above the charts. It's like this, that there are, in one day, his hospital in India does something like 60 surgeries. That's more than all done in all the hospitals in Singapore. So it's just a scale issue. So there is a learning effect. To your point, Bob, so he said, look, do you see this painting? And he showed us a painting. I said, yeah, it's interesting. It just looked like nothing to me. It's flowers and something. So he said, I think this is the most beautiful painting. And we're all wondering. He said, this was painted by an elephant in Thailand. He said, I went on vacation in Thailand, and I went into one of these reserves, or God knows what places, and there was this elephant whom they had trained. There were these elephants, many of them, who were trained to paint. So you just pick a model. They have a full portfolio. Which one do you want, sir? So you pick one, and they put it on the easel for the elephant. The elephant looks at it and paints another. It just copies this.
That's the most remarkable thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, and then they came back, and there's some YouTube videos on that. So he said, I thought to myself, if you can teach an elephant to paint, I can take some doctor with some basic medical knowledge, and I will turn him into a great heart surgeon. See, here's the main thing that I think his approach reveals, is a different way to think about problems and solving problems. And I think this is something in the literature that we don't understand well enough, the difference between expertise and expertness. Expertise is generative. The expertise is the ability to solve problems that haven't been solved before. And that's what, Bob, you and I have sort of our card-carrying members after our PhDs to demonstrate that we can solve problems that haven't been solved before, right? That's why we got our PhDs, and we continue to do research and look for problems that haven't been solved before. Whereas expertness is the ability to execute solutions competently to a given level of quality. So, so this is a complex model. So he has figured out a way to think of routinizing fairly complex things. I'm sure that.
I was just going to say, I could talk to this man all
Yeah.
afternoon, but Peter, I want to make sure everybody else gets a chance to ask questions.
Right. So it turns out that a lot of things can be routinized. And this is, by the way, this is cataract surgery. India is another country. I mean, when you have 1 billion people and you get old, you get cataract and you need it. The average price of cataract surgery, apparently the easiest is about $3,000, goes from $3,000 to $10,000. Is the cost of surgery over here. My father got it done, it was $250. And he was the paying patient. There are all these
So that was a full freight.
Full
You
price.
paid the whole.
Yeah. But you're not going to get a private bed in a private ward and all that.
Yeah.
You're going to be prepped up in a gurney and sort of put and they'll sort of have you come the previous day at 6 a.m. They'll put you on a gurney. A couple of nurses and a medical student will come and prep you, and then there'll be a team of doctors who will follow. So they just open up a new kit, operate. How are you feeling, sir? It's all outpatient. Then move on to the next guy, and you move. Then behind you is the post-operative care team that says.
Well, I see. What I think is I mean, what you're saying is eye-opening and fantastic, and in some cosmic sense, I think terrific from a non-nationalistic point of view. On the other hand, you can see how it's different from the harpist who's upstairs, because the harpist upstairs is probably still getting union scale, right? And you see where I'm getting from. And whereas here, these are reflected in remuneration, and so obviously it's a way in which comparative advantage, which used to hit low-income, low-skilled people, is now hitting people up and down the line in the
American
question
is,
economy.
how much does a heart surgeon make in India? The heart surgeon makes $150,000. You know how much money $157,000 is? You could buy 2 Mercedes-Benz cars, live well, and buy 2 Mercedes-Benz cars for cash.
I'm sure that's true, but the heart surgeon who loses his job in the United States is not interested in
Okay,
that, right?
you're talking about heart surgeons losing.
Yeah, I know. I mean,
Yeah, but
in this
in a-
particular sector, it's more complicated, but
It's a very
in general,
interesting.
yeah.
Actually, again, we could talk about this forever because I visit the Narayana Hridyalaya every year. It's sort of every time I tell him, I'm very sorry that you're giving me an hour of your time, which you should be spending in your surgery, but thank you for doing it, right? India needs 250,000 surgeries each year. In Indians, the total capacity in India is only 80,000 surgeries in a year. The rest of the 170,000 just sort of die over time, for all kinds of reasons. Out of the 80,000, almost 8,000 are done in Devi Shetty's facilities. So and his model could sort of get replicated very well. The other thing he says is that, heart surgery, he tells my students, was pioneered in Minnesota in 1959. And it's been, so many years since then. He says that.
I'm sorry, the basic intervention, the basic heart intervention, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the heart bypass surgery,
Right.
all of that. The basic heart surgery was pioneered here. He says that it's truly 50 years later, less than 2 to 3% of the world's population can afford this surgery.
Right.
And he says it's a huge tragedy. So he is on his own mission to do these kinds of things. The interesting thing I want to tell you is, people say, but is it the same, right? Are you doing the same thing? He said, no, it's not the same. And let me give you an example. What you get in the US is a Rolex. What I give you is a Timex. And I will not pretend that a Rolex is a Timex, or a Timex is a Rolex. It will tell the time, and it will do the job. There's a whole bunch of other things that come around in the US that sort of raise costs and so on and so forth, not just the sewing up of the cutting open and the sewing up. He says take some amount of time, some amount of whatever. That's not the cost. So that's the Timex part of it.
I want to make sure we're just about winding up.
Yeah.
People have any other questions?
Actually, one thing I'm really curious about, one of the reasons is, how are we gonna keep the American economy going? Because a lot of the big companies, you've read about General Electric and stuff, they're making more of their investments overseas, and that money's not coming, that money's not paid back in taxes to the US. And as well as, they're doing more of their investments over there, so, like you said, R&D, they're building these plants and stuff all overseas. How are we
That's very
gonna
true.
keep the American economy going, basically?
Let me just take you through, I think, a couple of slides that tell you that the answer to your question is by doing some things differently. This is a GE device made in India by Indian engineers that an ECG, and it's an echocardiogram. 10 rupees is 25 cents. So you get an echocardiogram for 25 cents. It's a battery-powered device, blah, blah, blah. Okay? And it's designed to be run on batteries and all of that. So the actual cost is, this is sold by GE on installment, where they pay 27 rupees a day. 27 rupees is about 60 cents a day. Is what the doctor pays GE, and then he can run as many patients. So it's a for-profit item. The point is, these are innovations that are changing how GE makes money. I bet you GE is going to make more money with these devices in the rest of the world than with by the way, this is a substitute for a machine that costs about $50,000 to $100,000.
But none of the tax money from GE comes back to the US since it's all foreign earnings.
Yeah, but if you think
Well,
of
the stockholders' profits can be taxed in the United States. You've got to remember that, the corporate income tax is just a scrim. And if you got rid of it, then all of the earnings would go directly to the stockholders.
Yeah, the other thing is, how do you keep people employed in the US since all of
That's a different issue.
See, that's the thing.
Right. Here is the other thing that I think our job, I can sort of, here's the potential opportunities, is that I don't have any problem here. I think we shouldn't be concerned about the fact that there's drastically reduced price point with almost everything that gets, because just that in India, it's not enough to have a backup. You need a backup for a backup for a backup. Nothing works. In that resource-constrained environment, there's enormous need for ingenuity. So there's a huge role for people like Dell and others to go in and create products. A computer costs $500. Dell is trying to bring it down to $10 to $15. With all the same functionality. Maybe it will not have a terminal because everybody has a TV. Things like that. So the point is, a lot of these things can also come back down here. For example, a washing machine that senses when the electricity goes out, which is a very common problem in India, China, elsewhere. And it resumes from that point onwards. It doesn't get reset. A cell that is shareable. I mean, we are all used to having our own cell phone. My daughter wants a cell phone. When you have a cell phone in a family, it lets you have what each individual user is concerned about is a passbook, is their phone book. So here is this, so you just key in your password and it's your daughter's phone and then it's your phone. So all of these, I believe, are going to be value creating. See, I have a little slide here that says that, look, what we do is size of the local market for products is high. Products developed in USA which have global versions don't fully tap the capability that if you think of potential global market for product, the local market for many of these is high. That's why we develop them here. GE builds it for the local market, right? If you think of doing the same thing abroad, everybody wants the same kind of car. The ability to innovate elsewhere and commercialize it for the rest of the world, the opportunities are just enormous.
Well, I think with that, we'll have to stop. Sorry we interrupted you so much.
No, I'm glad you did this because this is exactly the point that this is the takeaway that we need to think about leveraging innovation because innovation is a global, I think, activity that we can take, our US corporations can take advantage of.